Thank you to Andy Pattantyus, KF0ARA. Andy comes to us with a boatload of experience. He is technically oriented and is a mech from 20 years experience in battery production. But in 2020, he made a decision to come over to the bright side, and he's joined us as a ham, got his general. And so he's going to talk about some of those trials and processes, being a new ham, and then what do you do with your certificate?
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak to your club tonight. It's an honor and a pleasure. So this will be the only PowerPoint slide is my header slide. My friend Terry Fuller, who's a wood carver, made this little call sign display that I have on my ham shack. So in the beginning, I was casting about for a hobby because for about 45 years, I had no time for hobbies. I worked night school, overtime, home ownership, exercise, sleep, so forth. So I had a slow work year in 2019. It was so slow that I actually cleaned my garage for first time in about 40 years. And it got me thinking that now that I have some free time, I need to do something to avoid going stir crazy and get something started with an eventual retirement in mind. And I considered many hobbies, ham radio among them. And my friend and coworker, Mike Thornburg, who just introduced me, and his brother-in-law, Andy Wiz, WC9W, these guys twisted my arm and said, hey, ham radio would be the perfect hobby for you. And so there I got started. And why ham? My mind needs mentally stimulating, chewy stuff. I like to build stuff, make it work. I want to get out of the house and, get some social aspect going. And I'm looking for something that's a continual challenge and never boring. So in December 2019, I started studying for the technician's class exam, went to the local club meeting in February of 2020, and they said they would be having an exam in March. So I was all geared up to take that. And then, of course, COVID hit us all and the exam was canceled. So I continued studying for the general class. And then in June 13th of 2020, I managed to talk the Hot Springs Radio Club, which is about an hour south of me, talked them into putting on an exam session, went down there, sat for both exams in the same session, and got my general class license. And here I want to recommend the QRC practice exams. They were very good and very helpful to me to prepare for the exams. So a couple of weeks after I passed my exam, this box arrives in the mail and I open it up, and what's inside? It's one of these, and it was a gift from Mike Thornburg, KF0ARA. He gifted me my very first radio. I know a lot of folks don't think much of the Baofengs, but this was my primary radio for the first year and a half as a ham, and I would say that this is a good enough radio, especially for a beginner. But there are some things about it. One is, if you're going to program it from the front keyboard panel, it's pretty cryptic and arcane. At this point in my ham career, I hadn't discovered chirp yet. So I sat down to program this radio and get the local repeaters programmed in. And mind you, at this point, I haven't had contact with any other ham since that one meeting I went to in February of 2020, because everything was still locked down tight with COVID at that point. So I programmed it, and boy, I'm thinking, how do I even know that I did it right? And I was ready to try and get on the air, and what do I say? It's kind of awkward, right? At this point, I've never even so much as heard a QSO, so I don't even know what to say. So I turned it on and listened to for a while. And what did I hear? nothing. It's just silence, And so I don't even know if my radio is working. Did I program it properly? So the next Saturday, I went to a ridge, which is about 3 miles from my house and has a direct line of sight to the Radar Hill repeater, which is on the bluff on the east side of Rapid City. And this is the view from the ridge looking northeast towards the Radar Hill repeater, which is over here somewhere. And I dialed up and spoke, and lo and behold, 2 hams answered, and I made my very first contacts on the air. And it was very nice. One of them, Terry Fuller, responded the next day with a very detailed email. And, so I just made my first contact, and he says, hey, you can build this antenna. He sent me this article and said, you can build this. Wow. Okay. I'm at this point, I'm just trying to get on the air. I'm not even thinking about building antennas. But nonetheless, his email also included an invitation to join him on a trip to a local mountaintop, number BB-88, for Summits on the Air contact. So I rode with him in his Jeep to the top of one of the mountains in the Black Hills. And this is Terry. He's holding his home-built dual-band directional Yagi antenna connected with a feed line to his HT. And we made quite a few contacts up there on the top of that mountain. So this was like a watch and learn experience for me, watching somebody who knows what they're doing. Terry's a retired electrical engineer and builds a lot of his own stuff. And so he's showing me how it's done. It was just a fantastic to get out of the house for a day. So next, I made my first most important modification to my Baofeng, which is I put this SMA to BNC female flanged adapter with this O-ring here to stabilize it. So this is nice and tight and not wiggly. And by putting this adapter on my HT, enabled me to experiment with a bunch of different antennas, because most of them are terminated in a BNC connector like this one. So now I'm trying to get into the Radar Hill repeater from my house, which my house is 11 miles from the nearest repeater. And the repeater is about 500 feet lower than my location because I'm up in the mountain range. So I'm trying to make contact through the repeater. And here you can see my Baofeng connected to, this is a 2-meter J-pole antenna that Terry Fuller loaned to me. And I'm having trouble getting into the repeater. Terry was kind enough to explain to me about J-poles, where you have a stub. Here it's a short. At the other end of the stub is infinite resistance, and somewhere in between is a point where it's a 50 ohm impedance, and that's where the feed line is soldered in. He fabricated this out of a piece of oak trim stock and some number 12 household wiring. And that antenna actually works pretty good. The thing about the repeater was that all of the local repeaters had fallen into disrepair, and unbeknownst to me. And so actually I was doing everything right, and I couldn't really work the repeater very well because the weak signal performance of the repeater was hugely suffering. So I'll talk about repeaters some more in a few minutes. So then I got my workbench ready for building and testing. This workbench hasn't been this clean ever since I took this picture, but you get an idea of my workspace. And I took up Terry Fuller's suggestion to build the 2-meter ground plane antenna using an SO239 bulkhead connector and a piece of feed line that Terry gave me, and went down to the local shop and had a BNC fitting put on the end so I could connect it to my HT. And this antenna actually works pretty good, both on VHF and UHF. This is a nano VNA that Terry Fuller loaned me because he had just bought another one with a bigger screen. And he had already pre-programmed in the frequencies into frequency ranges in here. So I didn't have to learn too much in order to just try it out and see how my antenna that I just built, how it was doing. Then I tried measuring just a rubber duck. I don't think it's a good valid measurement because the HT is actually, and your hand holding the HT is actually part of the intended ground plane for the antenna. So just putting it like this is really probably not the best configuration. But I measured it anyways because I was just, playing around. So now comes the club project side of the ham radio experience. So this is 2 months after I got my license. The call went out to club members, hey, we need some help because we're installing antennas up on and feed lines up on Terry Peak. So Terry Peak is the highest mountain in the Black Hills. It's about 7,500 feet high. And on the top is this just ridiculous array of about 9 or 10 massive towers. They're all like 300 or 400 feet tall. And we have space where we can mount our stuff. So what's happening here is we're installing a repeater antenna and installing 7/8" hard coax to feed the signal to the repeater that's at the top of Terry Peak. Terry Peak is one of 8 mountains that exceed 7,000 feet in altitude here in the Black Hills. And then on a weekend not too long after that, we're replacing the VHF repeater antenna at the top of Bear Mountain. This particular repeater location, the club actually owns, and we pay a nominal lease to the U.S. Forest Service every year for the rights to be up here because everything is controlled by the Forest Service. And this is a 140-foot tall Roan 45 tower, and then this is the equipment room, a cinder block building. We're replacing the antenna at the top here. Now, at this point, I scarcely know what a repeater is, and so I'm going out there just being a pair of hands. Tell me what to do or show me what to do, and I'll do it. Learning by watching and doing. So now I was ready to buy a mobile radio. And I purchased, after having a reasonably good experience with the Baofeng, I decided to try another Chinese radio. I really wanted to like it. It's a tight little package, but this thing is just absolute misery to program from the front panel. Chirp doesn't support this particular radio, so that was a tactical error on my part. I ended up purchasing the RT Systems software for $50. So now this inexpensive radio is not very inexpensive anymore. I would have done better to buy a name brand radio used. The transmit died after 9 months, turned out to be a bad microphone cable. This is a really bad connector here. Bought another mic, another $20. So now the cost of this thing is adding up. It's not such a good deal anymore. What I would say is if you must buy a Chinese radio, check the Chirp site, see what's supported, select a supported radio, and if you're going to buy a Baofeng, buy it directly from BTech instead of Amazon. So those are my recommendations about Chinese radios. I assembled it all with a little Bio NO 6 amp hour battery, and this whole thing is designed to fit into a sling pack so I could take it with me and do a quick mobile setup. So this is a bit more guts than your HT if you just want to go out there in the field and do some quick operating without much fuss and bother. Here I'm experimenting with, here's a dual band antenna that I've just mounted to a little tripod. I've got a Edison Fung DBJ1 dual band roll up J-pole hanging from the Venetian blinds, and so I'm experimenting with antennas here to see what I can do with contacting others in the repeater. Some more projects. This is our club president Ryan Lindblom adjusting a corner reflector. In South Dakota, we have 17 linked repeaters that are in the linked repeater system that we test out every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. And our repeaters are hooked together or connected together through these UHF reflectors that allow all of the repeaters to be on the same network that is not dependent on internet or anything else. It's dependent only on the power or backup power of each repeater location. This is our club vice president, Mike Moore, who is also the head of our technical committee. And what he's doing right now is tuning the filters, the cans, using a spectrum analyzer. And he's done a really great job setting up our repeaters for us. This is our club president, Ryan Lindblom, and our vice president, Mike Moore. And this is the entirety of both the VHF and the UHF repeaters all installed in one wall-mounted rack mount cabinet, because we're in somebody else's equipment building here, so we wanted to have everything in one rack mount cabinet that we could lock up, and then we have control over it. We're back now here in Bear Mountain. You know, we got a guy up here on the pole, and now what we're doing is installing a 160-foot long section of 7/8 inch hard coax, and you can see it's a windy day. And when you got a guy up there on the tower, you got to have 5 guys on the ground providing support, because when this guy needs tools or whatever, you have to be ready to give him what he needs and hoist it up there. So I was part of the ground crew this day. So after all those field work, it's now winter time, and I'm ready to do some building. And so before I do some building, I decide to get some instruments. Like this might look like a toy, and it's only $30 from Amazon, but it's a pretty serious little device. For example, little identified devices from you, right? A triac might look very much like a transistor, and this thing will tell you it's not a transistor, it's a triax. And if it is a transistor, it'll show you that and show you the NPN. Sometimes transistors are poorly labeled, and it's really good to be able to put it into a tester and see, which one is the emitter and which one is the collector, and make sure you got the orientation right. So with that, I decided to try my hand at building a radio. So this is a QRP Lab QCX Plus, the 40 meter version. So this is a 5-watt QRP transceiver that is intended for CW. Here in this configuration, you can see the P, meaning practice mode. So you could use this radio as a code practice oscillator. And this is a little key that I purchased from a ham who's a CNC machinist in San Luis Obispo, who makes a whole lineup of both straight keys and paddles. And so I bought the kit from him. It was like $65. And I really liked the kit, except for one thing. I didn't like the way he organized the contacts, and it would crackle when you make contact, and I didn't like that. So then I decided I was going to modify it. And so from McMaster Carr, I purchased some number 256 set screws with silver tips, and I put a thin lock nut here. And now I have a really nice contact here, and now that works. That key works beautifully. And I also purchased the J38 key from one of our hams who was the original purchaser about 60 years ago. His name is Ken W0SEB. So he purchased this key when he was a young man. He's 80 years old now and still pretty active. But I bought this really nice J38 key from him. And here what I've done is I've connected this straight key that you see in the picture here, and I've connected it to the COM port on the computer. And I've got a software called Precision CW Fist Check, which actually tells you what the correct timing should be for a character, and then it'll show you what you've keyed so that you can have a visual feedback as you're practicing keying characters. This is the letter R right here. I also built a QRP antenna. This is from QRP guys. It's a DS1. Comes in a kit, so you got to put it together. Without this center coil, it's a 10 meter, 20 meter vertical. And if you add this loading coil here, you can make it into a 40 meter. And you got to have like a 16.5-foot counterpoise wire on it, which you attach right here to this screw. It works quite well for listening. We had a project where one of our silent key hams, his surviving family decided to gift all the ham radio equipment to the club for an auction to support the club. So half a dozen of us went out there on a cold winter day and essentially harvested all the antennas from the antenna farm. There was so much ham equipment there. I mean, we were there from early morning till it got dark, getting all that equipment out of there. But this is an example, once again, of a weekend work project with the hams. Here's another weekend work project. Mike Moore and I were out there replacing the guy wires on this Roan 45 tower. This is holding up the VHF antenna on our Radar Hill repeater. And here you can see we've got the guy wires all nice and tight and snug. So we've replaced the small diameter guy wires with some larger diameter guy wires to stiffen up the tower. This slide marks the end of my first year. The previous slide was like on the exact 1-year anniversary of getting my license, and I decided to reward myself by getting an ICOM 7300 HF transceiver. And then this is a signal loop QRP loop antenna that's good for 80 meters through 17 meters. And the way I have it set up here is okay for listening, but it's incorrect for transmitting, because you should be at least 6 feet away from a loop antenna when you're even at low power, like 10 watts, because of the fields. So I think we're doing pretty good on time. So I'm going to show you a few more slides from the next 6 months, where now it's starting to get serious, where I've done a lot of learning and I'm starting to get a handle on things. And now I'm starting to get mobilized as far as actually doing some serious ham stuff. Here I was helping the club get ready for field day. They had a damaged high gain TH3 junior antenna, so I purchased all the repair parts for it and put it together for the club so they could use it on field day. Here we're supporting Black Hills 100 foot race. If you can believe it, it's a 105-mile foot race of trail running, where the runners run through the night on the trail. And there's many places in the Black Hills that have no cell phone coverage. And so our club provides a community service by providing connection between this base station, which is at the start-finish line, and 3 other stations that are checkpoints in the Black Hills where there's no cell phone coverage. And so we provide the communication connection. This is a communication trailer built by our club president that's filled with radios and batteries and such. After much experimenting with antennas, I finally settled on this Comet CH72S for my HT. I really like this antenna, and I would recommend it heartily to anybody who wants a good antenna for their HT. So now it's time to get into the attic. I live in an HOA, so all kinds of outside antenna towers and wires strung all over the place is a non-starter in my neighborhood. But I have lots of attic space. But when I stuck my head up there through the access hatch, this is what it looks like. And you can't even walk up there. So my first project was to build walkways in the attic so I could get around to the point where I could actually mount some antennas. I took a break from the attic walkway construction to man one of the checkpoints for a Veterans March. So once again, this is a place where there's no cell phone coverage, and we're providing the communications at one of the checkpoints for the, it's kind of like a walk slash foot race. So some people walk 100 miles, others run a marathon, others do a 10K, and we provide the communications. We had some more club projects where we had to get backup generator out of the Terry Peak location, along with the switch panel, to replace this old generator at our Radar Hill location. To make room for the generator, had to get rid of this cast iron boiler that weighs about a ton. That was really a project to get it out of there. We had work projects to refurbish this is our Radar Hill clubhouse. It's a old Minuteman missile silo control building that we lease from the South Dakota School of Mines for $10 a year, but we're responsible for maintaining it. So we had a bunch of weekend work projects last year, just basically trying to get the building buttoned up so it didn't leak water and make sure it got through the winter okay. We had a whole bunch of people out there doing some pretty heavy construction work. We got rid of the old generator, found somebody to take it away, got rid of the old doghouse where the generator was. This is the propane tank for the backup generator. Here we're getting rid of the old boiler that weighs a ton, actually lifted the front of this tractor wheels off the ground, loaded it onto a trailer along with the doghouse, found somebody who wanted it. Then after all those weekend work projects, I finally found some time to get back and building my own ham shack. So I've built the ham shack into the corner of my garage, which is heated. So it's reasonable even in the winter time. This is what it looks like now, fully populated with radios and all the stuff that hams have. Here you can see the feed lines going straight up into the attic. These are LMR 400 feed lines, 25 feet long, with silver-plated connectors at each end. That's what the ham shack looks like with the radios turned on. I mentioned before that I built that ground plane antenna from that article that Terry Fuller provided me the day after I got on the air for the first time. So I built that antenna, and that is actually my best dual band UHF VHF antenna. I've got it mounted in the attic, all tuned up, got some nice chokes on it, so the feed line's not part of the antenna. It works great, and I'm able to contact all three repeaters in the Black Hills with this setup. When I was installing these antennas, I decided to get serious about using the nano VNA that I had purchased. So I actually used the nano VNA to do the measurements on the antennas and the feed lines to make sure that I was getting good readings and everything was good. Another antenna that I installed was the permanent version of the roll-up J-pole. This is also an Edison Fong antenna, the dual band J-pole. Here it is installed in the attic, and you can see some two different kinds of chokes on there, so that works good on both VHF and UHF. That's what the configuration is. It's really made out of a ladder line. These articles are readily available on QST for anybody who's interested in these antennas. And when I installed it, I wasn't getting the kind of advertised readings. And so I was unhappy with the way this looked on the SWR. And so I talked to one of my fellow hams, and he said, "Show me the picture that you've installed." So I showed him this picture, and he says, "What's this thing here?" And I said, "That's an Arrow antenna that I took down, and I just leaned it up against one of the beams in the attic." And he says, "Well, that's why your antenna's not working right. You've got a nearby metallic object." So I took that away, and then instant happiness. I didn't do anything else except remove that piece of metal, went back and measured it again. Everything looks really great for both UHF and VHF. And so then I had a good working antenna. So that's an example of a rookie mistake. And now I'm no longer in my first year, I'm in my second year, but I'm still learning. Finally did what I should have done in the first place, which is buy a decent dual band mobile. Since I bought this one, I actually bought another one, a Yaesu FTM 6000R, which I really, really like. The one thing I don't like about this ICOM is the fan comes on whenever you transmit, and it's really noisy, whereas the Yaesu doesn't do that. I really like the Yaesu for a base station. This is a 6-meter ground plane antenna, and I've got it set up at my friend Jeff Halgerson's place on the tripods, and we were measuring it with his signal spectrum analyzer. I installed it in the attic along with a feed point choke that I got from the choke cookbook author Jim Brown. With this installation in my attic, I was able to make connections this summer on 6 meters with a couple of guys up near Alberta, Canada. So it was about 1,000 miles away. And you can see that this antenna measures out really, really nicely. And then just as a finishing note, I have all the materials purchased, and I intend to build this antenna to put in my attic. And I'm choosing this one because I don't have to build too many more sidewalks in the attic to try this one out. But this is a design by Kai Siwiak, KE4PT. It's an off-center fed, end-fed dipole. It's kind of a strange design, but it's intended to be looped like this instead of stretched tight. And this is some construction details related to that. So this is, as soon as I get my next free weekend, I'm intending to build this. And that's my last slide. And so ready for some Q&A.